Okay, so this video is just going to be a demonstration of the basics of Omni.js. So I've got a basic app here set up just with some examples of what you can do with Omni. So the first thing we do is require Omni, and then the next thing we do is we create a collections object. Which right now it has nothing in it, it's commented out. So we're just creating an empty list of collections, and then we call Omni.listen with a port and our list of collections. So let's just do that for now with just the absolute basics and see what we get. So if we look at our client, which by the way, what we're getting on our client is just being served in the public folder. That's one of the defaults of Omni, which can be disabled. But so right now, the reason we can do some things on the client is because of all of these scripts. So make sure if you're confused about how things are happening on the client, just make sure to include all that stuff. So straight away, if we go to localhost on that port that we specified in our code, then we can look at this list of collections. We can just call omni.collections and we get an empty object. You can also access the collections with a global collections object. So right now both are empty. So let's go ahead and actually add a collection in. So we're just going to add a single collection of messages, and I'll go into detail a little bit more about what a message actually is. Of course, we have to actually uncomment the line where we require that. So now if we go in, we should see we've got an actual collection. We've got nothing in it, but we do have some stuff going on in here. So the nice thing is that the collection that we get is actually a Backbone collection. So if you look at all the methods you can call, it's all the same methods that you'd be able to call in a Backbone collection. So that's really, really nice. Now let's look at some of the details of what Omni does to extend a typical collection or a typical model. So to create an Omni model, you require Omni in your file, and then you can just extend omni.model, which is just like extending backbone.model, and you can pass in all the same parameters and all the same properties as you can in a normal Backbone model. So if I wanted to, I could create an initialize method, which I can't spell, but you get the idea. So the only thing that Omni adds is a read permission and a write permission method, where I think they're pretty self-explanatory, but the read permission takes a connection and a property parameter, where the property is the property you're trying to read from, the property you're trying to read, and the connection is the connection that's trying to read said property. So for example, in this case, what we wanted was any property that's equal to password, we return false, and everything else we return true. So anyone who looks at a model, this message model, can see any property on it except for the password. Now this property not equal undefined part, Omni will actually call this method with just a connection object the first time, and if it returns false, we won't bother calling it ever again, because we know that essentially what that's supposed to say is that you can't read any single property from this. So if there is no property, we should return whether or not you can read a property, not any specific property. So in this case, we return true if it is undefined. So in addition, we also get a write permission method, which takes a connection, a property, and a value that you're trying to set it to. So you can use the value for things like checking the size of a string, make sure it's not too large, or whatever, make sure there's no Unicode characters in there, things like that. And then, yeah, property is the same thing, and connection is the same thing. And here I've just written a getMessage method to demonstrate that even though this model is defined on the server, we'll be able to call getMessage on the client. So that's very cool. Now if you look at the collection, very similar to Backbone as well, except we extend Omni collection. We pass in a model, which is the type of model that this collection contains, and we also pass in a create permission and a destroy permission method, where all we get is a connection object. So the connection object that you get is actually just for persistence, so you can set things on the connection. So I could set connection dot some property equals true, and now everywhere else where this connection where I set some property tries to do things, we can check this some property method to see which connection it is, things like that. So it's for verification purposes, for persistence between a single connection. So In this case, on our messages collections, any connection with the property admin that equals true is allowed to destroy messages, but everyone else is not allowed to. So if we look at our app now, if we go ahead and load the app, so we've already seen that we've got the collection of messages. So if I go into here, messages, I can actually add a new message, and we've seen before that everyone's allowed to add messages. So I can add a message test. Now we've got a single message in there. If I refresh the page and we look at collections again, we should see we do have that. And now if we open actually a second app, a second with the same thing, let's go ahead and check the length. It is 1 as well. And in real time, if we add a new message without actually refreshing anything, let's add a message that says test2. We can go ahead and get the length of this, and it's actually 2. So it's already updated what the message is, and if we get that message, .get message, we will see, of course we can't just call at1, we have to actually get the messages object. We'll see it is actually test2. So the real time did work just like that. Didn't have to do anything special. The last thing we should check is that the method that we created, I think it was called get message, that it did actually propagate through, and we can call it on the client, get message, and we'll get, it just basically says this.get message. So pretty cool stuff right there. So now the only other thing about Omni which is unique is the events system. So defining an event is just, you basically just pass in a key which is the name of the event, and then a list, a hash essentially with just the key run and a function, where the function you pass in takes a connection, list of collections, and then some data, whatever the client passes in as data. So this event is supposed to authenticate a user, where essentially we just check if the data password is set and it's set to 1234, then we set connection.admin equals true. So if you remember somewhere else up here, we checked if connection admin was true. So now if we call this event, we should actually be able to destroy a model successfully from the list of collections. And the return value will get returned into a callback on the client. So if I add these events now into Omni, restart the app again, let's go ahead and refresh it. So we can go ahead and grab a list of collections. And right now you can actually delete, sorry, we don't actually have any messages in there, but let's just add a default message with the message test as well, just so we can mess around with that. So if we look at Omni collections dot messages remove 1, it will actually successfully remove it for us. But if we refresh the page and we look at that same collection, it'll still be there because we didn't actually have permission to remove it. So locally everything seemed okay to us, but the server sort of rejected our change because we didn't have permission. But if we first authenticate, so let's go ahead and say omni.trigger, which is how you trigger events. Let's trigger auth with the parameters with the correct passwords. Put the correct password in, and you get returned a callback from this. It doesn't really matter. We don't have to actually do anything. Let's just go ahead and log the data, and so we can see we're successfully authed. And now if we go and remove the first message and we refresh the page, we should see the length is now 0 because we had permission to do it, so it did actually get propagated. So anyone else who was connected at the same time would also see there are no longer any messages. We had permission to remove it. And so that's pretty much the basics of everything with Omni. You can do a whole ton with that, and anything that you can't do, you can always write over top. I guess the last thing I should mention is that the omni.listen method does return an object, which is server, which gives you express. So you can say like express server or app. Most people like to call it app, server.express, and IO is server.socket IO, I believe. Might just be WebSocket actually. Sorry, yeah. WebSocket. That was horrible spelling. WebSocket. So if you want to add any custom stuff, you can just do like app.get / function recres, and you can do any standard Express stuff in there. If you want to do anything standard with I/O, you can add new listeners. You can do whatever you want. So on top of what Omni automatically gives you, you can just completely extend without any problems. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers all of the basics. If you have any questions about that, there's a couple example apps on the GitHub repository, and if you have further questions, you can contact me on IRC. The details are in the GitHub repo for that.